welcome to Investors Guide. Thank you so much for tuning in. We're looking forward now to the big budget announcement on the 29th of February, Monday. And on this week's special episode, we'll discuss what you can expect from that budget. So when you're watching it on Monday, you know what to look out for. We're expecting a lot of changes, but we're going to try and find out which of those changes are likely to impact your money the most. So grab a pen and paper, note down our email ID. If there's something you hear on the budget that you don't understand, or if you have a question for us, feel free to get in touch with us. We'll be answering your questions for the next couple of weeks, and specifically on budget day as well, during our special show in the studio between 7 and 8 o'clock in the evening, which will be live. Joining me in the studio today, Pranav Saitha, tax expert at Ernst & Young, M. Ravichandran, he's the president of insurance at Tata AIG, and of course, like every week, Narendra Kumar, the CEO of Value Research. Pranav, I'll start with you. Every year, we sit around expecting the government or the finance minister to increase our, our tax deductions under Section 80C. We had an increase last year. Now, it's logical to expect another increase because it's completely out of touch with what we're spending, with inflation, with current expenses. But is it fair to assume two increases, two years in a row?
It's not going to be an easy one, given the fiscal situation, given the need of the government to have an enhanced tax base and so on. But I still think the government will oblige. It's not that a huge amount of tax impact is going to result from that. I would expect at least an increase in the ATC exemption limit, which today is 1.5 lakh, plus there's a separate 50,000 for NPS. I would expect that limit is increased. So I do expect at least a 50,000 increase from 1.5 lakh to 2 lakhs. And separately for NPS, of course, the limit will stay, or they'll just combine it and make it 2.5 lakhs.
Okay. Ravi, the other thing I feel very strongly about is health insurance, the fact that we are woefully underinsured in this country. And the deduction available to us of 15,000 rupees a year for your entire family, if that's what you're buying, buys you almost nothing. Give us an example. If I were to buy a cover for, 2 adults and a child, and the adults being in the age of 30, 35, in one of our big cities, for 15,000 rupees, what would that buy me?
See, it would be, in today's context, not much of value that you will get for that amount of 15,000 rupees.
It's about 3 lakh rupees, if I'm not mistaken, a cover of 3 lakh rupees, which, if you live in Mumbai or Bangalore or Delhi, is no cover at all for a family.
And this limit of 15,000 has been set, I understand, way back in 2008. I think that rightfully should go up, keeping in mind the inflation. And we all know the health inflation is very, very high. So I think the rightful place for that should be anywhere between 50 to 75,000 rupees. 50
to 75,000 rupees, and that would buy me a cover of what?
Maybe 10 lakh plus easily. And today, if you look at anybody having a major organ transplant, the minimum money that would be required in a place like Mumbai is about 25 lakhs. So I think people have to look at upping their sum insured or the limits of insurance for which they're buying the health insurance.
All right. Narendra, obviously, health insurance is something we talk about on a regular basis. A cover of 10 lakh rupees should be a bare minimum for anybody who lives in urban India. Do you think there's a case there, of course, to increase that tax break as well?
I would expect that, look at the same problem, whether it be the standard deduction or the taxation limit. I don't think we should be looking forward to the budget. All these things, all the limits, all the concessions, all should get revised with the capital index, with the cost inflation index. That way, all the kind of rigidity which gets built into the system will keep getting annually, revised, and it will be a very methodical way. And we will have, we will gain some long-term perspective, that what to expect. It will actually eliminate surprises.
That's a fair argument, Pranav. Link it to inflation. And obviously, the other thing that I believe should be linked to inflation is the house loan interest deduction, which is currently at 2 lakh rupees. Again, completely out of touch with the market, completely out of touch with what we're paying for homes. If I'm paying an EMI in any of our big cities, it's normally between 80,000 and 1 lakh rupees a month. That means close to 12 lakh rupees at the end of the year. My deduction altogether, principal and interest, is no more than 3.5 lakh rupees. So it's completely out of touch. But do you think there's a possibility at all this government might be considering linking all of these deductions to inflation? I mean, that's an idealistic point of view. But
it's absolutely justified in terms of an ask. Conceptually, I couldn't agree more. So Narendra says it absolutely correctly. Just two things. One, at a practical level, unfortunately, I don't think this government will do it. That's one. And that might be for a variety of reasons. Although it ought to be done, I don't think it will get done. Second, I think there is a correction that we need, a one-time correction in any case, which cannot be done through an inflation indexation.
Right.
So once we bring it, for example, 15,000 of Mediclaim, I mean, if it has been there for so many years, you first need to up it in a manner that it comes in.
First need to reset it to current times, and then maybe
and thereafter you can
inflation.
probably link it to inflation. The other thing, I just to echo what Narendra also said, you know, this budget comes in the backdrop of a government which is talking of financial inclusion, which is talking of housing, which is talking of stability, certainty, predictability in the tax law. So if this government really means business, then I think some of these things must come in.
So if you were to put, you know, a priority list down, and you know, this is my worry here. Yeah. There's a lot to think about from the finance minister's point of view. There's GST that they've been trying to move for such a long time. They have to bring the service tax regime as close to GST as possible. Where do direct taxes, so yours and mine, income tax, and all of these small little things about how much we get on our health insurance, where do you think that will find room on the priority list this year?
So if there's any government which is closest to doing something like this, I think it is this one.
Okay.
This government really understands and it stands for a lot of the middle class, I think. And I would feel, therefore, it is closest to doing it. Nonetheless, the fiscal room is very, very limited. Explain
to our viewers what you mean by fiscal room.
So we are talking of a fiscal deficit commitment that the finance minister has made. We would have, with the 7th pay commission and with the OROP and all of that, we would have been woefully short of meeting that fiscal deficit target.
Hasn't crude helped us this year?
Crude has helped, and because of that, we are close to probably meeting the fiscal deficit targets, and it's all thanks to crude. But otherwise, direct tax collections are woefully short. Indirect tax collections would have been short had it not been for the windfall that came because of crude and the ability to hike the rates there. Given that, in the next year as well, if we want the government to spend, revive investment, build infrastructure and so on and so forth, we are probably talking of spending much more. Not much growth happening, in the sense revenue from direct taxes is not growing enough. In that kind of an environment, I'm not too sure that the government has the fiscal room, the ability to reduce its incomes, reduce its direct tax collections, because that will mean overshooting the deficit target. Already the government is spending much more than the revenue it earns from the taxes.
So just to put that in very clear terms for the viewers who are watching, while we will want larger tax breaks, now every time the finance minister gives us a larger tax break, it takes out of the income that goes into the government. And right now, and the most important part of the budget is a fiscal deficit, which is the difference between what the government is earning and what it's spending. And the likelihood that the finance minister might not make that target. Narendra, how worried are you about the fiscal deficit? If we look at it from a larger investor market point of view, we're all invested in the equity market through our mutual funds. We're all invested in the debt market through our mutual funds. How crucial is this fiscal deficit number at this point?
No, there is nothing new here. You know, governments have always been in deficit, and the deficit has been only getting larger. Right now, we are looking at a government-led investment which will catalyze our economy, because we see that we don't see such, private sector has the ability to drive the markets or drive investment. So in that sense, that becomes very crucial, and this government has been trying to devise some mechanism of, putting its limited contribution, trying to mobilize money from external sources. We hear more about, the PPP, the speed of clearances. So it's a tough balancing act.
Ravi, you were talking to me about, the government spending on infrastructure and how that's really important. But there's also an expectation of a mass health insurance scheme. Tell us where that expectation stems from and what that scheme is likely to look like.
I think if you look at this government, I think they have been working on the concept of financial inclusion. As part of that, they introduced that Jan Dhan scheme, and also they introduced a couple of very noble insurance policies which had helped popularize the concept of insurance. And I think it's been done very, very well in terms of the fact that a lot of people could buy it. It's a very simple product. Technology has been used. So the obvious expectation from the general insurance industry is that obviously the government would look to take one step forward and try and get people into an health insurance ambit.
All right, we're going to take a very quick break, but when we come back, we'll talk more about your investments and how your investments are likely to be impacted by the budget, and if you, as a long-term retail investor, should make any sudden moves in reaction to the budget. That's on the other side of this break. Don't go anywhere. We're preparing for the big budget announcement, which is on the 29th, so Monday. In the studio with me, Pranav Saita, Ravi Chandran and Narendra Kumar. Narendra, before we went into break, we talked about the NPS, and this is something that, it's a question that you've personally answered on this show for several years. The fact that NPS now, according to the tax rules this year, has a 50,000 rupee added deduction, which Pranav pointed out in the previous segment. But when you get the money back on maturity, it's taxable, and that puts it at a disadvantage when compared to other, retirement options. Now, here's the thing. As a private sector employee, I can compare it and I can choose one. But as a public sector employee, I have to use it compulsorily. Is this an oversight that you're hoping will be fixed in the budget?
There are two problems. One is that the tax treatment is completely out of sync for any retirement savings plan. You accumulate your savings, all other, even a normal equity plan or even a debt fund, you're liable to capital gains tax subject to indexation. Even that is not allowed on NPS. So all the deduction that will happen and will accumulate on your retirement, 40% of the money must be converted into an annuity, and remaining money, as and when you pull out, will be subject to taxation, will be liable for taxes. So that, I think, is very unusual and unfair. That needs to be fixed. That apart, when NPS was initially planned, it was planned as a scheme where subscribers will have the choice. But subscribers, the government employees for whom it has become the default plan, they don't have a choice. Only 8.5%, it is a combined plan. Only 8.5% money goes in equity, remaining in fixed income, and they can't really exercise any choice. While the architecture of NPS is that they should be in a position to exercise their option of asset allocation, where they and whom they want their money to be managed by.
Pranav, while this is a very, very good point, it's also, I want to bring it back to what Narendra said earlier on the show. This is not something that needs to wait for a union budget announcement to be fixed. It can just generally be fixed by the government at any point. So, but would you be hoping that it actually gets done in a week's time?
I certainly feel this is something that should get done. Of course, outside of the budget also it can probably be done, but would be far more difficult because this requires an amendment to the law, which is easiest done through a finance bill. So I would feel that here's a thing which is clearly inequitable. When you compare NPS versus the rest of the ATC and whether it is PF,
it goes against
LIC,
the fundamental idea
right,
of
absolutely.
that plan.
And there has to be a level playing field. There has to be a sense of fairness, especially when it comes to NPS for government employees. I would feel that generally as well, NPS should be brought at par with all the other saving instruments that we have under ATC, even so far as this additional 50,000 is concerned.
Especially in a country like India, where saving for retirement is something that needs to be encouraged so desperately. So you have this wonderful product that's been designed, that's low cost, and it fits into all of the necessities, except this one thing that needs to be fixed fixed immediately. The other thing that I'm personally very passionate about is the housing industry, and the fact that we've been talking about housing for all, and there needs to be a fill-up in some way, some sort of encouragement for affordable housing that the government gives. But there are a couple of other what I would call travesties in our tax system when it comes to housing. For example, if I today buy a home that's under construction, which everybody's doing, and that's how the market functions, and I'm paying a pre-EMI, and if that home is not delivered to me within 3 years of me taking that home loan, my pre-EMI deduction, which should be 2 lakh rupees, comes down to 30,000 rupees for no fault of mine. And we know that there's a tremendous delay happening right now across the board, across various projects, and that could be anybody's fault. And that's an argument for a separate day. But just from a point of view of someone who's bought a home, that's completely unfair, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. You're penalizing someone for something over which he has absolutely no control. And that's something that goes against basic common sense. I would therefore feel that 3 years probably should go altogether. But I would feel at least it will be enhanced to 5 years, is my expectation.
5 years would still be inadequate. I track this market.
There's no logic. There's no logic. Just as there's no logic for 3 years, there seems to be no logic for 5 years, because there's something not in my control. Nonetheless, given the way the governments function, I would feel at least there'll be an enhancement of this period. Though ideally, it would be great if it goes completely.
It goes completely because it's obvious I'm paying a pre-EMI and I'm paying it to the bank. So why don't I receive a deduction? There should be no conditions on it. Narendra, I know you wanted to come in on this, and I'm going to add one more thing that's unfair about this same rule, which is this. If I sell a home to buy another home, I have a 3-year window within which I should complete that deal in order to be exempt from paying long-term capital gains tax. Now, if the home is not delivered to me within those 3 years, that deduction is no longer available to me. I will still have to pay long-term capital gains tax. Again, it's completely unfair, and we know that there are delays in the market.
Absolutely. And, it's very rightful for consumers to expect this. And I think, government must consider doing this immediately, simply because even the government is to be blamed for this. Yeah, the elusive real estate regulations, it is in the works for nearly a decade now. And that can actually make sure that can really expedite things. So if the government is to be blamed for something, and that the consumer is getting penalized even on the tax front for an incentive which was intended, and he's absolutely at no fault. And in fact, the delay in getting this regulation in place plays a great role in all these delays.
Well, of course, the other problem is service tax. Again, on housing, I pay service tax on under construction homes, Pranav. I don't pay service tax if I buy a home that's ready to occupy. Now, the only reason why someone will buy something that's under construction is if they cannot afford something that's ready to occupy. So imagine here's somebody who's paying rent on the home that they're living in, paying a pre-EMI on the home that's under construction. You're burdening them with very hefty service tax. It's not a small amount of money. In some cases, 4% of the total value of the home.
Right. No, that's very true. And while you say and make a very valid point, I'm not very hopeful that this one will go. Somehow or the other, housing has to become more affordable. I do agree, but I'm not too sure this one will go.
All right, Ravi. Obviously, there is the whole point of service tax.
Right.
The fact that now service tax needs to be brought as close to GST as possible if we ever see GST do come true. From an insurance company's point of view, we know that the life insurance industry has had a huge problem with having to tax investors and buyers of life insurance. That's also the case, with health insurance. Do you think that perhaps there's a case here for smaller ticket insurance policies to be exempt from service tax?
I think there's a very solid case in terms of at least health insurance to be exempted. If you look at healthcare in the country today, they're not subject to service tax.
Yes, so why is the insurance
when
policy
the insurance
there?
policy which is aimed at taking care of the healthcare, I think philosophically or maybe conceptually, it should not get come under the purview of service tax. So that's very clear, in my view, a case for health insurance policies being exempted from service tax. If I may add a point on housing, since there has been so much of discussions on housing, and looking at the recent calamities that is happening in the country, I think the government also would do well if they come up with some incentive for people to buy home insurance, either a tax incentive, or I even make a radical concept here. Like in some countries, I understand it's compulsory for people who are living in calamity-prone areas to have a home insurance policy.
I know investors would prefer more carrot than stick in this case instead of
Absolutely.
making it compulsory to offer some sort of tax possibility.
Yeah, I would feel that compulsory is something that I would not subscribe to as a view. Yes, giving some form of tax incentive might be fine. Educating people, in short, trying to get that kind of a realization amongst people at large, and that's an effort that the government can do. I would rather go that way rather than making it compulsory or mandatory for people. Without doubt, I would.
Yeah, even if it's a small, I mean, it's not a very expensive policy.
Absolutely
even
not,
if it's a small tax deduction, as long as it gets people saying, "So what is house insurance and why do I need it?" I think that would have achieved a fair amount of headway. Narendra, I want to very quickly ask you before we run out of time, if you were to put one thing right on top of the priority list for the finance minister, what would that be?
Fixing the NPS, because it has been in works for a long time, and modernizing our tax. The first point which I made, that if we are able to align all the concessions and everything that we get and link it to inflation.
Then also very quickly before I let you go, obviously a lot of investors are going to be watching the budget looking for cues. As retail equity investors, should we be reacting to the budget in any way?
No, not at all, because the reason why your investments actually turn out to be good, or they prove to be good for you over time, is something in which budget is going to only play a catalytic role or a very limited role. One should be in good companies, one should be buying good funds, one should be investing regularly, and one should be allocating only long-term money for your long-term goals. If these variables are in place, government, a union budget is just another small event.
We've been having these conversations on this show for about 5 or 6 years now. We started off by talking about the direct tax code, which everybody was worried about, everybody was preparing for, and now it's completely defunct. It's no longer on the table, it's not discussion at all. But just the spirit of the direct tax code, which was to simplify the system, make it easy to use, make it easy for average people to sort of file their own taxes, with apologies to all, chartered accountants, to just make it easy for someone to use on their own. Do you think there'll be some spirit of that still left? That the budget might in some way attempt to simplify our process, because it's still very complicated.
I think so. In fact, I think the thrust of this budget will be less on giving away freebies or tax incentives and SOPs and so on. That's my feel. It will be more about how does one bring about a more simpler, taxpayer-friendly, more predictable, stable, certain tax environment. And if that is achieved, I think this budget would have done a lot.
But I also want to ask you this: government has talked about, obviously, like you pointed out, rationalizing the tax system, making it fair. It's a government that wants to be seen globally as someone who's fair and stable when it comes to taxation and tax terrorism. But this is largely from a corporate point of view. From an individual point of view, from a retail investor point of view, what are the sections you believe are slightly terrorizing and should be abolished?
So there could be a few things that the government could probably do, not only in terms of the provisions in the law, but also in the way the law is administered. One, for example, is to ensure that refunds are given in time, and that if they are not given in time, there's a penal rate of interest that the government pays to the citizen. That is something that is absolutely essential. On the one hand, the government gives 6% interest on the refund due to me. It's never given on time. The interest is never given for the full period for which the refund has not been granted and so on. That has to change. There has to be a feeling in the mind of the taxpayer that this is a fair regime and that he should be a proud taxpayer, not that he feels cheated at the end of the day.
It sounds like a good theme to me. Ravi, if you were to put something on the priority list for the finance minister,
I think apart from whatever Dhiren and Pranay have said, I think one of the important aspects from the general insurance industry we are looking at is the kind of emphasis this budget is going to put on growth. I think the country needs a lot of infrastructure. We spoke about housing that also will generate employment. And also we spoke about the couple of schemes relating to insurance, like the universal health insurance scheme that we spoke about.
Sure.
And some policy statements in regard to home insurance as to how they are going to address. I think these are some of the expectations from the general insurance industry side.
All right, so that's something we're going to be watching out for. Remember, Narendra, they're telling us NPS needs to be rationalized. There's a lot of taxation rules on housing, on our investments that need to be rationalized as well. We're going to be keeping a very close eye on all of that for you right through Budget Day. I'd like to thank all three of the gentlemen on the show for joining us. But for you at home, remember, on Budget Day at 7 o'clock in the evening, right up to 8 o'clock, we'll be right here helping you understand all of the announcements that are made. We'll have a live audience. You can send in your questions if you want to. Email IDs at the bottom of your screen. If you'd like to be part of that show, get in touch as well. We'll help you understand what happened in the budget, how it impacts your money, and what your reaction should be. That's on Budget Day, the 29th of February at 7 o'clock in the evening. In the meantime, enjoy your weekend, and thanks for watching.